So this presentation is just going to cover some of the tips and tricks, some of the new transformers, and maybe some of the slightly older ones that you can work with HTML and APIs and FME. We see a lot of questions come through on live chat, on support, so I thought it might be quite nice just to sort of try and grab a few of them together and do a bit of a summary, quick guide presentation. So how many of you in here have ever looked at something on a website, looked at some data online, and wondered how you can extract that information? Okay, that's a good sign. You're all in the right place. So I've put together a little flow diagram that hopefully can maybe help people. If you're looking at something on the web and you want to extract that information, make it usable, how you can do that within FME. So we start off with a creator. That's you guys arriving at this talk, which is good. And then you get to your first tester. So do you want to read data from the web or extract data from the web? If no, and you fail this test, you're in the wrong presentation. There's a terminator, and you should probably get out. But if that's good and you're all in the right place, so the first thing to have a look at is if there's an API available. Because if there's an API available, you can use the HTTP caller to make different HTTP requests against those different web services. If there isn't an API available, you might find the data on a web page is inside a table. So new in FME 2017, I believe, the HTML table reader can now be used to extract that information as a table. You just put in the URL. And then if there isn't a HTML table available or an API, then you want to start having a look at the HTTP caller and the HTML extractor to try and extract that information out. So the first thing we'll have a look at is if your data set that you're trying to connect to or web service has a REST API, then you want to have a look at the HTTP caller. So inside the HTTP caller, you can choose the method that you want to use to go against that URL. Put the URL in. If you've got any headers that you need to put into that, you've got a lot of different parameters in here. You can put the headers up here. There's a drop-down of the common headers that you would choose from. You can upload data in here, so you can either just upload a string like this, a body, which happens to be JSON. You can choose content type. You can save that response that comes back then as an attribute. And you will also see the response error. If it comes back, it'll give you the status code. So you'll know if it comes back and it's successful. If it fails, it's normally pretty good at telling you what's wrong with what you've tried to do. So you can go back and fix that. If you're connecting to maybe a system or services that have a lot of different APIs and you want to keep hitting different ones, a really good way to do this is wrap up all these different HTTP callers into a custom transformer. So if any of you were around yesterday or possibly on the East Coast World Tour, Don really likes talking about little bits, which are these electrical connector circuit things that do things. That was a really bad explanation, but we have stuff up on Knowledge Center in a video, and if you ask Don about them, he'll gladly tell you all about them. But they've got an API up on their website which allows you to do multiple things. So you can sort of write to the device because it's got a little cloud bit, so you can send a message to it. And then whatever output connector you've got in this circuit will do something. So that might be an LED. The light will come on then when you run this workspace, or MP3 player with a speaker, and some sound will play. So that's just one of the API calls that you can make. You can also create sort of subscriptions to the little bits. So when something happens on them, it can post to somewhere else. So you can use FME with a HTTP caller to create that subscription, list all of the publications or subscriptions you've set up, delete them. So instead of every time me trying to do this, I would put down my own HTTP caller and fill in all the details, because normally I'd mess it up a little bit and it would come back unauthorized or something. I'd have to keep going to Don and be like, oh, it's broken again. Can you come and help me? So instead, he wrapped all of this up into a custom transformer, so the little bits connector. And then inside of that, you can see it gets a bit messy, but it makes it a lot easier for an end user who might not be so familiar with setting up a HTTP caller for multiple requests. Instead, you save all of those and wrap it up into a custom transformer. So inside the custom transformer are custom transformers, and then inside each of those custom transformers, it has the HTTP caller that makes the right request against the API, depending on what you're trying to do with the little bits. I was using the HTTP caller a while ago. So Transport for London have a really great set of data all available through APIs. So you can get information on the underground tube trains, on the stations, on the buses that are all going around, and on the bikes. I don't think they're called Boris bikes anymore, but Everyone knows them as Boris bikes. So they're kind of similar to the Moby bikes that are around Vancouver. You just go and rent them and drive them around, and you can drop them at any other station. But we were hitting into problems with FME with API request limits. If I was running these workspaces too quickly, Transport for London were like, no, you're hitting our API too often, you need to wait a bit. FME server job runtime and queuing. So with the HTTP caller, if those requests are getting delayed in coming back, that workspace running can take a lot longer. And it's sending all of those HTTP requests one by one. So this was the workspace that we built to do this. So you can see I've got a HTTP caller over here, which is first going off to their API and returning a list of all of the bikes in London, all of the different bike stations. That's returned as one big JSON array, so that needs to be fragmented out so I get a different feature for every single bike that's available. And then that's going to more HTTP callers over here to actually return the status on those bike stations. So for every bike station around London, it will return you how many empty bike slots there are, how many bikes should be available at that, so you can start to get a good view of sort of where people are traveling around on the bikes in London. But to try and speed this workspace up, because there are nearly 800 bike stations in London, this was taking quite a while to run. Sort of like a cheaty way of making it a little bit quicker. You can put a modulo counter in there and set that to maybe go to 3. With a test filter, you can split that out based on the count, so you're naturally sampling it or splitting it out into 3 equal-sized groups. And then they're all going off into their individual HTTP callers to try and speed that workflow up. And then there's just handling that data that comes back, so taking a JSON flattener to convert the JSON that's returned into attributes so I can work with it, and then writing that out into a database. One of the other new things that's in 2017 which would make this workflow a bit easier is the new scheduler, or when you run a job, you've got new settings in here. So you've got this queued job expiry time and a running job expiry time. So if I'd put one of those jobs up on FME server, maybe the HTTP caller was hanging, that workspace is going to take a really long time to run, if it even ever completes. So you can put in that running job expiry time, so if it's running for more than maybe 20 minutes, I don't want that to keep running, because if I'm scheduling this every 10 minutes, I've got jobs coming in behind it. They're going to start and overtake this. So I can put in that expiry time. And as well for the queue jobs, if I know jobs are being scheduled every 10 minutes and I've got 3 jobs sat in the queue before it, I may as well set an expiry time in there to kick them out of the queue. So the next one comes in and I'm not running 4 jobs straight after each other, when TFL might come back and be like, now you're hitting the API limit because they're all scheduled and running straight after each other. So this is what we managed to do with all of that output with all of the bikes. So the bikes are colored depending on bike availability around London. And then FME was used to generate the statistics. So every time that was run every 10 minutes, that's being stored in a database. FME is then taking all of that, working out statistics for every bike station, for every hour, for every day of the week, getting the current bike status as JSON. And then you can also do route finding with it. So using the data streaming service and the shortest path finder, you can find the nearest tube station from that bike, for example. Another type of sort of API web service you can connect to is SOAP. So we see a few questions come in about SOAP. How do I do it? SOAP's a bit horrible. Tried to play with it the other day, but the best way of doing it is sort of building that XML first and then using the HTTP caller to send off that request once you've built the XML in the way that the SOAP API needs you to. And then you can use XML transformers to take the response and convert it into something useful, like attributes. I believe there used to be some SOAP custom transformers up on the hub, but they've since been deprecated, I think, because it wasn't reliable enough. So if you're looking for those, it's probably easier just to do it yourself with the XML transformers and a HTTP caller. So if your data doesn't have an API, but it's available online as a table, we've got the HTML table reader now in FME 2017. So a long time ago, I was using FME to check chocolate stock availability. So this was before all these transformers came in FME 2017. This was 2016, I think. So I was reading in a Lindt chocolate website as text, as HTML, and having to work it out. But they knocked down that website. They clearly aren't a big fan of me doing that. So instead, I've moved on to checking filming locations in Vancouver. So the park where I live, near where I live, they quite often have filming. So you see these bright neon arrow signs around, or really bright lights at night. So I was really curious about what they're filming. And it turns out they were filming Once Upon a Time, which I've actually watched on Netflix quite a lot. And they were filming that in the woods. So I was like, I need a way of knowing when they're filming Once Upon a Time, so I can maybe work from home. If I know early enough in the morning, and then at lunchtime maybe go for a walk around the park, see who I bump into. But I found this out just before we went on World Tour, and it turns out that's when they had just wrapped filming. So this turned out not to be very useful either. But the idea is that you can put in a URL to that website into the HTML table reader, and you can see on this website. So you can see here they've got the two different tables in here. So they've got upcoming filming locations and filming locations from yesterday. So you can put in these websites into the HTML table reader, and it will turn you a table back of what's coming in there. So then you can send out notifications on Slack in the morning to tell you what's filming that day, what's upcoming filming, and you'll know when and where. So then I can go and find it. If you watch any of, not these ones because this is from April, but if on that website there are any filming locations in Vancouver, you know what you can do if you've got any downtime. So if you don't have a API or the website doesn't have a table, you can use the HTTP caller and a HTML Extractor transformer. So these are new in 2017. The HTTP caller can be used to just get all of the HTML code from that website, and then that attribute is used in the HTML Extractor. So for the Boris bikes in London, this was great and easy to work with because they had an API. The Moby bikes around Vancouver don't have an API. So it's a little bit more work and effort to get that data out. But they do have a really nice interactive map on their website. But the data is stored as a JSON array. So it looks kind of like this. When you right-click on their website, if any of you are familiar with this, if you right-click on a website, you can view the source code. So you can do that just to open it up and have a look at what's behind it. So that's what I was doing here to work out. They've got this really big JSON array. And then I had to try and work out how I can pull that out of all of the rest of the HTML code on that website. So HTML extraction can get quite messy. If you're extracting text, you've got HTML tags you need to work with. Like with the bikes, just showing you can end up with massive JSON amounts. You might have XML, and then have to use regular expressions and lists to try and pull all of this out. So I was doing a bit of that here. So this is the workspace that went off to that Moby Bikes website, pulled down all of those markers and had to extract that to turn it into something useful. So I've got the HTTP caller over here. That's just getting all of that code from the website and putting that into a HTML extractor. So the HTML extractor at first look is a bit of a dark art. I'll show you a screenshot in the next slide about how you can use the HTML extractor to pull out bits that you want. That was all sorting out into a list, so every single feature that matched what I'd put in there was output as a list. So I was having to search through all of those lists to find the bike slots, so I knew I was hitting the right JSON. Using a string searcher to get the right bits out, a JSON fragmenter to split them out into each individual bike station, and then just doing some fancy bits at the end just to colorize it when it went to the data inspector. So this is what the HTML extractor looks like inside, if any of you haven't had a play with it yet. You've got the options in here. You put the attribute that has the content in there here, and then you can put in a CSS selector. So if you're not entirely sure of what a CSS selector is, it's kind of like how the code is grouped together on the web page that you would style it by those groups. But the help on here is really good. It tells you a lot more information about what the HTML extractor wants, and it gives you a good link to an external website that explains in more detail about how you can build those queries up. So if you're not entirely sure, it took me a long time to actually think, yeah, maybe I should actually read the help for this transformer when it wasn't working. So that's a good tip. And then for the return format, you can set it to first match. So the first one it will find, you just get one output attribute. Or if you want it to match several things on that page, you can set it to return as a list. And then that gave me the output just in the inspector. I managed to pull those off the website, colorized depending on percentage availability, and then you can see that in the data inspector. So you can see all the different dots of bike stations around Vancouver. You might have a website that doesn't have a nice JSON array. Maybe you just want to pull out text. So if the accent didn't give it away, I'm actually from the United Kingdom. So if I wanted to go back there and I was maybe interested in finding out, like, what's wrong with the UK at the moment, what should I look out for, I might want to pull all of this information off this website into a different format that I can use. So this was using a similar workflow. So I've got HTTP caller and a HTML extractor. This time extracting different information that was available on these different tabs, as well as all of the text inside it. And then doing some work with lists and regular expressions and string and places to pull all of that out, get rid of those tags. Because on that website, you can see here at the bottom, they've got a lot of links. So if I'm pulling that out as text, I end up with those link tags in the middle of it, which doesn't make it easy to read. So you can start to use regular expressions to get rid of those tags with the triangle brackets. They probably got a proper name, but you can build up these regular expressions and replace that with nothing, so it makes it readable. And then you have to make sure it's not a greedy regular expression. If I took out the question mark and the plus in that, it would go from the very first triangle bracket to the last one and take everything in between and cut out a whole load of text. So you have to make it so it doesn't do that and just takes the small snippets. And then you can output to that something like Excel. So you can see all of the information from all of those tabs down the left, and then all of the content for them is on the right-hand side. So HTML doesn't have to be too scary in FME. At first, when you first look at it, it might think, oh my God, like I have no idea how on earth I would pull all of that out. But if you can have a look at the source code, if you've got a vague idea of what you're doing with that, you can start to see if the data that you want is maybe in a format that you recognize, maybe JSON, maybe it's text. And then based off that, you can try and work out what might be the best way of doing this. A lot of it as well will be trial and error with the HTTP stuff, HTML. There's quite a few times I've run a workspace, a lot of times changing out the different CSS selectors and messing around with the list to try and make sure I've got what I want coming out of it. So one of the things that came out in 2016 when we were on the world tour, it seemed a lot of people hadn't used the HTML report generator before. So is there anyone in here that hasn't used it, has never heard of it before? Okay, there's a few of you. So instead of reading from websites HTML, you can actually output HTML using FME. So there's this transformer called the HTML report generator. So it's actually really useful, pretty neat if you want to make quick reports or websites that you can share with your colleagues. You can quickly build up charts, tables, maps, put headers in, information. And it's actually really easy to do. And then taking those bikes from Vancouver, using the HTML report generator allowed me to really quickly build a website that looked like this. So I've got the header, I've made these different points around here, you can click on them and it tells you what the latest bike availability is. And then a nice table at the bottom so you can see in order of which bike stations have the most availability. So if you go away from here and you're trying to extract data from the internet and you're running into problems, the Q&A on our knowledge base is actually a really good place to go and look for help. So there's a whole bunch of people on here. If you just type in HTML into the search, you can see a list of questions here. Loads of them have got answers. You can go on there, see if somebody else has tried to do what you want to do, or if you're still really stuck, put a question up on there. I mean, there was a case the other day, someone was chatting to us on live chat. With the UC coming up, we've all been really busy doing that, so it wasn't something we could look at straight away. So they offered to put it up on the Q&A forum, and in less than 24 hours, they had 2 answers on there, someone helping out their question. So if in doubt and you're not sure how to do something, this is a really good place to go and post ideas and see what other people are up to. So thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully after Chris Hadfield, that wasn't too bad to follow. If you have any questions, these are my details. If you've got Twitter and you're interested in following the FME stuff on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter. If you see Kat as well, if any of you've met Kat, she's desperate for followers too. So trying to not get her to overtake me now. So yeah. So does anybody have any questions? Yep. This one. Yeah. So I think there are a few as well questions on the forum where people have asked similar questions and done this. And if you haven't used like the regular expressions in FME, you can use the regular expression editor. So you can put all those expressions in and test it against the code to make sure that what you're doing is right. So you don't have to type one in, run it, and wait and see if it works. Great.
Anyone else? Oh,
Yeah.
got a mic here for you.
I was just wondering if you've made your bike API available for the tourists while we're here in Vancouver.
No, sorry. Maybe next UC.
Great. I think we only really have a few. Yeah, if there's no one else, I think there's only a few minutes before the next speaker talks. But thank you, Jen.
Thanks.
Oh.
Thanks, Steve.